Hear me okay and is seeing the title slide and should say creating a culture of giving in your organization just to make sure you're in the right session. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. I am really excited, honored, humbled to be talking to you today. My colleague, Brian Manning, is going to be helping, hopefully, moderate and assist, facilitate the chat and questions. So, Brian, Brian, can you hear me? Do you want to see if your audio is working? All right, no big deal. Everyone else's slides are, hopefully. So everyone else is seeing the slides, hopefully. So goals of the session today. We have a very meaty topic, a lot to cover. What I hope to leave you with is really four goals. Why this topic of sustaining open source projects is so critical now. Then we'll look at how and what organizations can do to give back. And then we'll look at some actual real world examples and use cases. And again, fourth goal will be to help address any questions and would love to get your feedback as well. So a bit about me. I am a partner and co-founder of Mediacurrent. This is just so you know some of the context at which I'm going to be speaking about today. This is I'm proud to say, my 13th consecutive DrupalCon. I come from an entrepreneurial background. I've organically grown and sold 2 companies, including Mediacurrent, and have been very involved with Drupal, especially at the local and regional level in Atlanta. And I'm very passionate about topics like this, sales and marketing and open source particularly. So a little bit about Mediacurrent. We are a full service digital agency that has been focused on Drupal since our beginning in 2007. I am speaking from you today about 20 miles north of Atlanta, Georgia, in Alpharetta. Our team size is approximately 90 people spread across approximately 30 states. Our clients range from anywhere from small to mid-sized businesses to some very name recognizable, high profile enterprise brands. So let's dig into it. Why is sustaining open source projects so critical? I was inspired to talk about this session about a year ago by an article that some of you may have seen by Dries. And in case some of you may not know, Dries, of course, is the founder and creator of Drupal, and he wrote a very lengthy thought leadership piece on balancing makers and takers to scale and sustain open source. And he asked in this article a lot of thought-provoking questions. What's the right governance model? What's fair within an open source community? How do we recruit the next generation of Drupal enthusiasts? How do we avoid burning out people who have been involved with the community for a long time? So a number of questions that Dries dug into, and I'll be referencing this article several times throughout the presentation. So one of the first things that Dries just begins is by stating the obvious, that open source has, for all intensive purposes, won. It has gone from being seen as more trendy to now extremely mainstream. And this quote just sort of validates what we already know, is that open source is now in the tech stack of almost every company, especially major corporations, the Fortune 500. And Dries goes on to say that there have been a number of popular tools and open source applications that we use on a daily basis. But Matt Mullenweg, I liked this quote, says also that people who are involved in open source have the ability to make an impact in the world. And we have certainly seen that lately. Drupal has been particularly on the front lines of fighting COVID, and powers a number of international nonprofits and government agencies, including ones in my home state, the CDC and Habitat for Humanity and Georgia.gov. So in terms of why you should care, there are a number of organizations that are leveraging Drupal that have such a positive impact in the world. And these organizations are seeing numerous benefits as a result of giving back. I would be curious to your thoughts in the chat if you think I missed any major benefits of getting involved with Drupal. One of the fallacies that I hear a lot in corporations that are reluctant to contribute is from maybe legal or marketing departments even, who are reluctant to contribute modules because they feel they may lose a competitive advantage by sharing that code back to a community. And of course, we know that's just silly, because the real competitive advantage behind companies is things like execution and the people behind the code and the product. So hopefully that mindset is gradually training, but a number of benefits include exposure to top Drupal talent, the flexibility and ability to prototype and come up with MVPs for different products. So these are some of the benefits that I highlighted. I'd be definitely curious to your feedback. But with these benefits, with this adoption, with this popularity of Drupal, there have also been challenges. One of the first landmark books written about how to scale open source projects was written in 2012 by Charles Schweik and Robert English, and they rightfully pointed out that the vast majority of open source projects fail. There ends up being an unclear vision, scant documentation, poor community infrastructure, lack of funding, for the same reasons that many businesses and startups fail in general. Open source projects are not averse to those same factors. So what can we do about addressing these challenges? How can we scale and sustain open source projects moving forward? When I was doing the research for this session, there were 5 ingredients, 5 factors that went into a successful recipe of success in terms of being able to give back. The first ingredient was that inevitably there is always leadership buy-in. There is a internal champion or a small group of people who are evangelizing those benefits of open source and Drupal within the organization. Second, there is a realization that open source software principles align with their own mission within the organization. They're able to pair profit with purpose. So organizations that see the benefits and the impact that open source, and they believe in the sharing and collaboration and the crowdsourcing aspect of open source, that's the second factor that these organizations tended to have. The third was they have come up with a model to be able to give dedicated time and autonomy to employees. So the number one reason why people don't contribute more to open source or organizations give back is usually a lack of time. We're all busy, right? So organizations, though, that have some kind of structure of dedicated time, tended to be to figure out, the model. And my recommendation would be less concerned about the when, and just being able to allocate weekly time into a forecast if you're an agency, or if you're a company, making sure it's included as part of somebody's weekly schedule. So dedicated time was a key ingredient to how organizations give back. The fourth was they were able to effectively show appreciation. We all crave appreciation and recognition, and organizations that have successfully contributed back to open source projects tend to have created this model around recognizing employees, especially first-time contributors. And the foundation for all of this is, of course, culture. Within an organization's DNA, the culture begins to permeate giving and a culture of wanting to give back. So those are the 5 key factors that went into that how organizations are giving back. Next, I want to look at some actual real world examples. We'll look at an individual contributor, a colleague of mine, Damian McKenna. We'll look at Media Current's own path and journey to giving back to Drupal. And then we'll look at a company, a corporation, Pfizer, who is also heavily involved in contributing back to Drupal. So a little bit about most of you, many of you are probably familiar with Damian. He has consistently been a top 10 contributor to the Drupal community for several years. He is extremely consistent. He has been involved with the community since 2007, comes from a developer and technology background. And I get asked sometimes, what exactly does Damian do? What is a community lead? And I asked Damian, I said, we have a job description, but in your own words, how would you describe what a community lead does at Media Current? And there are other companies and agencies that are considering having a dedicated resource to focus solely on being involved with the Drupal community. So Damian, in his own words, said essentially that he is an ambassador. He acts as a liaison between Media Current and the Drupal community. He's very heavily involved in helping promote our contributions and, again, helping advance anything that we contribute. And some of our contributions, proud to say, are a number of different distributions, and we have consistently been one of the top 10 contributing organizations to Drupal over the years, and Damian has played a huge role in that. And Damian has also been a huge advocate of making sure that we have a contrib first mantra and mindset. And Damian's recommendations for those organizations that want to have a contrib first mentality is begin with training your team on how to properly use tools to be able to give back, and coming up with effective communication and promotion. So this is really critical to avoid duplication of efforts. We have all probably worked on a module, or many developers have worked worked on a project where only later to find out that there was a similar use case or contrib module that was already in the Drupal community that could have solved 80 or 90% of their use case. So when you can effectively communicate with maintainers and those in the Drupal community, you can potentially save a lot of time and avoid that duplication of efforts. And Damian also is an advocate of recognition as well, and encouraging and putting a spotlight on those who do give back. Also, talked to Damian a little bit more about what specifically motivates him to continue to stay involved, to continue to give back. And Damian's answer was interesting, but it really shouldn't have been surprising. Damian said what really motivates him is to be able to work on projects that he personally cares about, that he has a vested interest in. So this very much aligns with a book that was written about 10 years ago called Drive by Daniel Pink. And Daniel Pink found that in most cases, employees are not as motivated by financial incentives and rewards as we may think. Of course, we all want to be paid a fair wage and salary, but ultimately, employees crave autonomy and mastery of their craft and purpose. And in the book, Daniel Pink describes an example of a software company in Australia. And he said the software company had a program where they would allow employees to spend 24 hours on working on anything that they wanted to. The program was called FedEx Days. Probably a blatant branding violation, but it was called FedEx Days because they had 24 hours to deliver something to their peers, to their leadership team. And of course, Daniel Pink said that this was one of the most innovative software companies in Australia because a number of ideas were born from these FedEx days because they allowed employees autonomy to have creativity to solve problems the company was having and to work on really anything they want. So that intrinsic behavior is what is motivating many to give back and contribute. So recommended read is definitely Daniel Pink's book on Drive if you want to find out more about that. Next, a little bit about Media Current's own personal journey. About 6 or 7 years ago, we started to really focus on our own why and our own purpose. And we decided that our mission statement is that we want to bring together the most talented team in the world to provide amazing open source based solutions for the web. So it's not a cult at Media Current. I don't want to give anyone that impression, but we believe strongly in open source principles. We believe that technology should be shared and free, and when this collective action of crowdsourcing happens, amazing things can benefit the world, and we can again make a positive impact with the clients, particularly that we work with. So let me share some of the more significant milestones in our journey. Sometimes get asked, how did we get started in creating this culture of giving back? And we immediately got involved, and I would especially recommend this to anyone who's fairly, new to the community. If you're a professional services company or an agency that's just getting involved with the Drupal project, start out by getting involved with your local or regional community. So I was the founder of Drupal Camp Atlanta in 2009. We started sponsoring the Atlanta Drupal user group. And about 10 years ago, we decided with marketing to try to focus on generating as much fresh, relevant content as we could in order to amplify our marketing efforts. So we believe that experts tend to speak and write a lot about their subject matter. So we started doing, sessions at camps and blogging and contributing a lot of content back to the Drupal community. And we then kind of evolved that into working with clients and training and teaching them on the benefits of giving back as well. One of our flagship projects was in 5 or 6 years ago when we led the migration of weather.com onto Drupal. And some of you may realize this, but at times weather.com is literally the highest traffic site in the world when there is, inclement weather going on, especially. And it was great to see the Weather Channel get involved when they were doing their migration, as much as they did. And then I get asked sometimes, some people know Media Current's story. About 5 years ago, we were acquired by a leading digital agency out of New York City called Code and Theory. And it was extremely important for us to find a buyer that understood our culture of involvement with the Drupal community. That was non-negotiable. If we couldn't find a buyer that understood how important it was for us to contribute and give back. And sometimes I get asked, was there pressure to, focus on more, billable time after the acquisition? Were we, mandated to be any less involved? And the answer to that is emphatically, no. And if you fast forward 5 years later, I'm really proud that Media Current is still consistently one of the top 10 contributors to Drupal in the world. For those of you who may not be familiar, the Drupal Association and Dries rolled out a attribution model several years ago, and it tracks things like how many issue credits you're involved with, case studies, projects. So we're really proud that we've been able to maintain this status, years after being acquired. Next thing I want to talk about that Dries references in his article is this notion that there are makers and takers in open source communities like Drupal. And I really liked this diagram he referenced. He said that if we take two organizations, there could be essentially one that has a philosophy of being a buyer of software, and a second organization that can have a philosophy of being a builder of software. So the buyer can spend significantly more money on licensing and proprietary IP than someone else that is contributing more heavily, disproportionately, in investing in open source. And Dries just poses the question, is this fair? The taker will reap the same benefits, have the same access to the code and the modules, yet they're investing significantly less. So I'd love to hear your feedback on this. There's some great examples that we can get into, but Dries essentially says that this is actually pretty common in society, and things tend to work themselves out, but this is a pretty critical juncture when it comes to scaling and sustaining and coming up with a fair and equal model to balance the makers and takers. So let's look more closely at an actual maker, somebody who is involved, who's adopted Drupal at the enterprise level and come up with a system for contributing back. So I was inspired about 4 years ago by Mike Lamb from Pfizer, DrupalCon Dublin. Truth be told, I lost touch with Mike, but I was very pleased to see that I think he was on the opening credits of this year's DrupalCon slides, and he stayed involved. And I was working on another session, and I reached out to Mike and wanted to just pick his brain on Pfizer's journey and path to getting involved with the Drupal community. And Mike's answers were not surprising. He said, Pfizer first got committed to Drupal around 2012 for the same reasons that many of us are already familiar with. Drupal's flexibility, the speed, the avoiding licensing fees, less costly, more capabilities, ability to scale. Literally thousands of sites at Pfizer were running on Drupal, still are. And Mike's the quote that stuck with Mike, he said, is what Dries and many of you have heard has said, come for the software, stay for the community. And I found it interesting that I was, also tying back what Daniel Pink said in his book. And when I watched the video of Mike and looked back at my notes, he echoed a lot of the same reasons around why Pfizer became committed. It aligned with their values as a company of collaboration and giving back and having high standards. And one thing that Mike talked about that is becoming hopefully a trend with other adopters and takers of Drupal is that they're beginning to hire partners and agencies and talent that are the most heavily involved with the Drupal community. And Mike also said that part of the appeal of open source was being able to focus on the subset of modules and the strategic initiatives that are the most relevant and impactful to Pfizer's use case. So if you're an organization considering what the benefits are, or trying to talk others within your company into getting more active in the Drupal community, look no more than to, Mike Lamb and Pfizer's, use case as an example. And next, I wanted to just share this. Some of you may already be familiar, but another huge benefit of getting involved and giving back to open source projects is through things like cybersecurity contests, hackathons, companies like United Airlines are running um, security, cybersecurity challenges within a controlled environment, and they're encouraging developers to identify breaches. They're encouraging people to help them improve accessibility and their user experience. And then they're giving prizes and contests. In United Airlines case, they're giving away Sky Miles. I will admit I chose this article and story because the college student was actually from Georgia Tech in my hometown of Atlanta. And of course, Ryan Pickering was his name. He ended up giving the vast majority of these Sky Miles away to nonprofits. So this is another reason, though, why organizations are beginning to, give back more, and why they should, frankly. Okay, so we've talked about some use cases. We've shared how organizations, what sort of the ingredients are for giving back. Let me leave you with some final thoughts. You may be new to the Drupal community. You may fall into one of these three categories, and I don't mean to make an assumption or paint with too wide of a brushstroke, but generally speaking, you may fall into more of a, non-technical background. You may be marketing or strategist or, designer or project manager. There is definitely a place for you in the Drupal community. You can definitely give back. You can definitely get involved. Things like translations and improving the knowledge base and documentation, helping with recruiting and marketing and evangelizing the benefits of open source. And of course, if you're on the technical side and do coding, there's certainly a place for you to help maybe maintain a contrib module that needs to be, ported over, or getting involved with one of the strategic initiatives that Dries alluded to during his keynote, helping with QA and testing. And if you're on the leadership side, maybe you're the founder of an agency that doesn't have specialization in Drupal. You're more CMS agnostic, or maybe you're in a leadership position within a company like Pfizer. Remember to give your team what Daniel Pink said about autonomy and dedicated time. That's one of the greatest benefits that you can provide an employee, and will help motivate them as well. And make sure you allocate a proper funding allocation, similar to the maker and taker slide, and make sure that contributing back to open source is incorporated into your budget and planning. And then I'd encourage you, and this isn't intended to be any kind of plug around only hiring those involved with Drupal, but hiring partners and talent from those that are subsidizing the Drupal community, and they can help navigate your own involvement. So I totally would welcome and appreciate your feedback. Thank you very much for attending and listening. And if you would like to continue the conversation, I will hang out in the chat. I know Brian, my moderator, a colleague, was having some technical issues. So Brian, I don't know if you were able to get back on. Anyone is more than welcome to email me. You can find me blogging occasionally on our website. I'm on LinkedIn. Would love to connect with you. All right. Thank you, everyone, very much.
Yeah, I'm back here. Can you hear me?
All right. All right.
Questions. I think Damian was able to jump in and answer one about the contrib stuff here, but we did have Michael Cooper asked here, said, I think that when you're an agency using Drupal to make money, it is easier to get the org to commit to contributing money to Drupal, but when you're an end user org like a university, it is harder to sell to governance body that changes over time as hiring devs and outsourcing to Drupal. How do you see the difference between agency versus university / end user?
That was a long one. What I'm trying I'm trying to find the question. Maybe it'll correct. You want to try to just we can come back to that one, Brian, or
Yeah.
summarize it.
And then we also, I've noted that here, and then we also have Jason asked for the Pfizer example, was there any resistance for any reason that needed to be addressed?
I don't think so. When I talked to Mike several years ago, and he's been gracious enough to kind of share their story. It seemed like they were able to get that buy-in that is always so critical. There, of course, there is usually resistance, like I alluded to, from legal departments sometimes, but hopefully those arguments are fading. It feels like, at least with some of the contracts and MSAs that we're seeing, there seems to be a more liberal approach to giving back to open source. So yeah, maybe we can we'll try to track Mike down this week and can kind of pick his brains some more.
Looks like Damien also was able to help track some of that there. And then it looks like Doug Van was asking, when a media current is competing for a project, are you able to score points for your Drupal contributions?
Yeah, definitely. It doesn't, hurt, Doug. Not at all. I mean, and I do see this as a trend. There's been a few RFPs specifically where they're essentially asking, what your Drupal street cred, is, and being able to validate that through the issue credit system on Drupal.org has definitely been beneficial, and I think it helps validate your mission when people can see actual numbers and data behind the claims around being involved with Drupal.
Great. And I think the biggest question of the night here is, where's the media?
Yeah, I know, right? This is like we're adapting to the virtual environment, and yeah, like it's 13 consecutive years and the first virtual one for us, but hopefully we'll be back next year. I will say the Drupal Association, geez, what an amazing job they have done transitioning this to a virtual environment. But yeah, I definitely miss the hallway conversations and seeing people like Mr. Hilton and in person, and other Drupal agency other Drupal agencies and peers. Yeah, it's no substitute kind of for some of the networking that can take place.
Don't see any more questions here.
Yeah, so I think just with the final minute slides, so Brian and I are going to work on finding a place to post the slides, somewhere central. Hope to do that in the next day or so, but of course, we'll more than happy to share the slides with anyone who attended.
Great.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate your time. Have a good rest of the DrupalCon.
Great. Thanks.